Valerie, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate your time and am excited to dive into this topic. Before we do, would you give me just a bit of background about you and your business?
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Felena. I'm so excited to talk about grants. It's one of my favorite things to discuss. And my name is Valerie Grant. My company name is Grant Consulting Services, LLC. And we have been in business for over 23 years, helping organizations across the world really to obtain grant funding and go through the grant development process, which can be quite an arduous process. I am in the Grant Professionals Association. I'm one of about 500 grant professionals that is certified, and that means that a third party has endorsed my ability and my knowledge and my experience in the grant realm. And also, I've recently become a certified trainer with the Grant Professionals Association. So I'm able to talk more to a broader audience about grants and grant development.
Fantastic. You are the de facto expert on grant writing. Awesome. I
Thank
got the
you.
right
I like
person. I got
that.
the right person. Okay, fantastic. All right, so I'm going to just ask some questions based on what I'm hearing. So, as you know well, and you're part of Hera Hub, we have lots of amazing women that come through our doors, every day, every week, every month, every year, and many
Mhm.
of whom are very heart-centered, are passionate about, an aspect of the world, life, et cetera, and they want to help people. And so I often am sitting down with somebody who comes in for a tour at Hera Hub, and they will say something like, I'm passionate about X. I want to start a nonprofit to support this particular cause or community. And so we'll start there. And I
Okay.
say something like, that's awesome. Have you researched the other nonprofit organizations out there that also have a similar mission to understand what the landscape looks like and where the gaps might be in the market? And 95% of people I talk to say, no, I haven't thought to do that. And the next thing I say is, did you know there's 13,000 nonprofits in the county of San Diego? There might be
Right.
one or two. That my advice to them is go get to know those organizations, perhaps work with them, whether it's volunteer or maybe, if they have an opening, take a job position with them or
Hmm.
propose a partnership of some sort before you go through the arduous process of not only becoming a 501c3, but also keeping your
Hmm.
501c3 status. And
Right.
that's just even like the phase one before we even talk about getting grants. So, am I saying the right things? Am I am I going the right?
Absolutely. Yes, yes. And I just love that people come and talk to you, and I hear from people all the time, and their hearts are in the right place. They want to do great things. They want to help people. They want to help the environment and animals, and it's to be honored, really. But
Yes.
grants and starting a nonprofit is a long game. It is a long process, and it can take a long time to get to the place where you're ready to start submitting for grant funding. So you're saying the right things. It would be like when you're starting a business, you want to do a market analysis, right?
Yeah.
You want to see what other businesses are doing, just like you said. So that's so smart to advise people to take a look at what other nonprofits are doing. Also, sometimes I advise people that want to start or are just starting out to try to get to know those nonprofits, do the volunteering, maybe even get a job, and then ask nonprofits that you have a relationship with to potentially be your fiduciary sponsor or fiduciary agent. And
Okay.
that would be where that nonprofit is the kind of umbrella organization. That way the person or organization doesn't have to go through the process of getting their 501c3, their tax exempt status. Now, on the other side, nonprofit organizations are not just going to partner with anybody if they don't know you. If you don't have a relationship, it would be worthwhile to start building a relationship. So that's another avenue that some people can take to do good things.
Awesome. Okay, so let's dive into that a little further, if I may. the fiduciary role. I'm going to make up a scenario. I love
Okay.
dogs. Let's say I want to rescue dogs from Mexico, and I'm passionate about this, and I have some really innovative idea, and I go do my research, I volunteer, I get to know a couple dog rescue groups, and I then propose to them, I have this innovative idea, some project I want to do. Would you be my fiduciary? I mean, how do I ask? How do I go about this?
Right. Well, you've done the research and you are in relationships. So hopefully you've been talking to the organization, the leadership there about what you're passionate about, what you would like to do. And if there's a gap in their services, like maybe the San Diego Humane Society does not rescue dogs in Mexico, and that's something they would like to do. And
Mhm.
they may say, well, Felena would be great at that, and we can partner with her. You can talk to them about putting together a contract. They will want a written contract. You will want a written contract that will state who is responsible for what. Because if there's money being changing hands, you definitely want to have a contract. Plus, if you're asking a third party, like a funder, for money, they're going to want to know what your relationship is and how the responsibility flows, what the processes and procedures are for handling funds and reporting and all of those intricate details.
Great. Okay. So I get a contract in place with the fiduciary. I then am now able to go out and raise money, right? Maybe I host an event of some sort. I raise some funds. Those funds
Mhm.
go to the fiduciary, and then contractually they would distribute whatever portion we agree on, or, some sort of maybe management fee, I assume, or whatever it is. And maybe there's a standard you can share if there is one, and then I can then take those funds and use that to, take a trip to Mexico or whatever I'm doing, around that. Is that the right idea?
Yes, in
Okay.
a general sense, that is the right idea. They would definitely have the financial responsibility and would either reimburse for expenses, which is common, or it could be funding that they give an allowance or funds up front. So it depends on the partnership and how the organization is set up financially and what their processes are.
Okay. Is there kind of a standard, fee for, scenarios like this, right? Like, a management fee of 10 or 20%, or is that just, there's no standard?
Normally, there is not a management fee,
Okay.
although if you're working with a fundraising firm, if you're doing that fundraising event, they may require like 10%, but that would be like a third party person. You could also write into the grant applications a portion of not management fees, but reporting and evaluation, which funders generally require, that could go to the fiduciary agent for their oversight. But there's no standard that I'm aware of for a set fee.
Okay, great. And so just following along with my fictitious example, although this is a good idea, I might do this. Um, we, hopefully we have a long running relationship with this fiduciary. We do numerous events, and it comes to a point in time where some of those folks that I've been courting who are funders say, hey, you should go do this on your own and start your own 501(c)(3). Valerie, give us just the highlights of this process and what it really takes and what it costs, frankly. I'm sure you're getting attorneys involved and all kinds of folks involved to set up an organization that has a, status, a nonprofit 501(c)(3) status, tax exempt status.
Yes, and somebody could do this all on their own. It would take a lot of time, though, and you want to make sure all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed, because you don't want your application to get to the IRS and have a review period of 3 months, 6 months, and then have it kicked back to you because you haven't filled in the
Yeah,
information.
and I'm
So
sure it's not simple. If it has anything to do with the IRS, it's going to be
exactly.
convoluted and complicated.
Yes, and they had a backlog a couple of years ago for at least a year for them to even start looking at it. So the process can be quite long. And so in the interim, you could use a fiduciary agent. That's another possibility. But definitely attorney's fees. You also have to have articles of incorporation. So if you have to incorporate in your state, and that can cost money, you can use an online service, you could use an attorney. So or you can do it yourself. So it can be, no cost up to several $1,000s to just have that incorporation. Then you send the paperwork off to the IRS. They review, hopefully approve, or they send it back to you for additional information. And then when you have that coveted tax exempt status, that's not the end of the line. There's a lot more work that you still have to do for the organization. And you would also need to, in California and many other states, register with the Attorney General, with the Secretary of State. So there's, once you have that document, there are many more layers and many more check boxes to tick off.
And I would imagine for most folks who come at this from a heart-centered approach, which I'm assuming most folks who set up nonprofits are coming from that approach, this layers and layers of paperwork, not just once, but annually and an ongoing basis, is probably not what they had in mind.
No. Forms can be passion killers. So you may want to let somebody else help you with that, and an attorney or other professionals to help you with the setup. It is, like I said, it's quite arduous, and there are a lot of intricate details that need to be input into the forms and information that needs to be conveyed.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So let's say I go through all that work and I finally get my 501c3 status
Right.
and I'm ready to go.
Yes.
Talk to me about now I want to go get some grants, right?
Mhm.
There's lots of different kinds of grants. We're not going to take the time to cover all the different types of grants, right?
Right.
But let's say I do some searches and I see some grants available for the type of work that I'm doing. What do I need to have in place as the nonprofit to be, and just blanket, I know every grant's slightly different, but
Sure.
what are grantors typically looking for as far as structure, track record, ability to be accountable to the money and report out on, how you use the money? What
Mhm.
are they looking for? And I would imagine there's a bit of chicken and egg going on here, right? Because how do I get to the point where I'm attractive to a grantor until I can get some money to do the things that I need to do to get my structure set up correctly, right?
Exactly. So you have to be independently wealthy if you want to, or have a fiduciary agent or work part time. There's so many different ways to do that. But you're right. The funders want to see a track record. Other documents that you would need that they want to review is an annual budget. They want to see tax returns, and the nonprofit tax return is called a Form 990. Sometimes they want to see 3 years worth of tax returns. So you have to have that proven track record in order to apply. The larger funders definitely want to see audited financials. And in fact, some grant makers don't accept applications if you don't have audited financials. That's a process too. Audited financials can take 8 months, 10 months, a year to complete. So there's more time on the books.
And
All right,
money. That's not
and
cheap.
money. It
Yeah.
is not. It is not. But nonprofit organizations that make less than, I think it's $750,000 right now, they are not required to have
Okay.
audited financials. They could substitute profit and loss statement and a balance sheet. But my point is, some funders just are not going to accept that if their requirement is audited financials. They want the third party accountability.
And
That's
that's
what
their
they want to
prerogative.
see.
They're the ones that
Yeah.
are dishing out the money.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. And then you want to have a 1 to probably 3 year strategic plan and include details about what you're going to do. And so that's on the documentation side. Now, on the narrative side, describing your organization that's going to be wonderful, going to Mexico to rescue these dogs, they funders want to know what is the need in the community. So you have to describe that very well. They want to know, what are you going to do about that? How are you going to meet the need in the community? They want to know where you're going to do it, when you're going to do it. So, we'll be in Mexico for 3 months rescuing pit bulls, or, be specific like that.
Yeah.
They'll want to know, do you have any partnerships, like maybe that fiduciary agent you would consider a partnership, or maybe there's an organization in Mexico using that same scenario. And then how will you pay for what you want to do? You're going to have a budget, right, which shows them numbers, but they want narrative. And just so everybody realizes, grants are not going to usually pay for 100% of the program costs. Just like individuals, we want diverse portfolios. Funders
Mm-hmm.
want to see diverse revenue streams for nonprofits. So that's important. And they really want to know, what will the results be? What is their investment going to bring to the community and to their organization?
Yeah. And how are you going to track that, right? And feed
Exactly.
that information back to the
Right.
funder, the grantor in this case. And
Hmm.
I'm just curious, on the private side or commercial, commercialization companies, funding, VC, angel, et cetera. A
Right.
lot of times an investor will want to know who else has already raised their hand to hand money, right? It's a small
Hmm.
community in the angel VC world. Is that at all the case on the granting side?
Definitely, especially in government funding, federal grant funding,
Mhm.
they almost always require a cost share. So
Okay.
the organization has to throw in some money, and then many budget forms have spaces for other funders. They want to know sometimes who your top 5 funders are, who your top 5 individual donors are. So they definitely want to see other buy-in into what you're doing. They don't want to be the only one.
Yeah.
It's like groupthink.
Yeah. No, totally. Totally. And if
Yeah.
they see another reputable foundation is
Mhm.
already committed to this particular cause, I would imagine that that would make them, look at it slightly differently.
Absolutely.
Potentially.
And having those partnerships as well. So financial partnerships and then other community-based partnerships are super important.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. And if you can just highlight, because I know this could be a 3-hour conversation, but just give us like the buckets that somebody would think about in regards to the types of grants. Obviously, you just mentioned one, which is government, right? And I think of like the National Institute of Health, for example. They do a
Hmm.
lot of grants, very specific. I've actually done a webinar with the NIH in this whole process. And I mean, these are like, talk about detail. Applying for an NIH grant is like a whole nother world in and of itself, I'm sure.
Yes,
I don't know if you
yes.
have experience with that. That's an interesting one. But what are the other buckets that we would want to think about?
Yeah, and the federal grants, I am with you on that. I was looking at a Department of Labor grant application, just the instructions, 78 pages alone, just for the instructions. And there's going to be dozens and dozens of different attachments and the narrative response. I didn't even get to that point, but it could be 50, 100 pages long. So you do not want to trifle with the federal grants. Don't start there, probably. so,
Yeah.
so government grants, there's federal. Sometimes there's regional, like maybe a regional water association. If it's a government entity, there are state grants. The state of California has a lot of funding. And then, of course, local grants like the county and also cities. City of San Diego, in particular, gives a lot of grant funding for different projects as well. A lot of times that money comes down from the federal government to the local level, but
Yeah.
we can make an assumption that the lower the level, the more simple the application. Not
Okay.
always, but it's
Okay.
kind of a
Yeah.
good rule of thumb.
Yep.
And then on the private side, there are corporate giving programs. So companies like WD-40. I'm trying to think of some local,
Like
Viasat,
Qualcomm, I'm sure.
Qualcomm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. They give funding. generally in their communities, these local organizations will give to San Diego. Larger organizations like Coca-Cola will give to different communities, maybe where they have a bottling station or some type of presence. And then you have foundations. Foundations can be large, like the Rockefeller Foundation is huge, the Ford Foundation is huge. Then you have some family foundations that are generally smaller, and then local foundations like the Carlsbad Community Foundation, for example.
Okay, awesome, awesome. And then last question, Valerie, let's say I identify a local foundation that there's a grant and I read the application and it's like spot on, exactly what they're looking for, I have to offer. I want to emphasize that because I see people, they'll look at a grant and like, that doesn't quite, that you're asking for this and you're offering this. This is, you know,
Right.
we need to pay attention to what they're asking for, right? Just like a job interview.
Right.
So let's say I find a really good match and I am my first time, I've never filled out a grant application before. Why might I hire somebody like you to help me since I have no idea what I'm doing? And then just if you would be transparent as possible, how do you work as far as like the fee, you know, I know it's a sliding scale, but like what should I budget to hire a grant writer to help me with that first grant?
Great question. And it does depend on the application. I think you said a local foundation. Generally, those applications will take maybe 7 to 12 hours, if that much.
Assuming I
Now,
have all my information in
I
order.
was just going to say that because we always start with a feasibility study to make sure you've got all the information. But let's say that part is already done. And it would depend on the length of the engagement. If you just want that one application written, we would charge an hourly rate, probably just for one. But for people that we work with on an ongoing basis, maybe to research and write 2 applications per month over the next year, we work on a flat fee or monthly basis with them. Our hourly rate is $125 per hour. And again, like that application, 7 to 12, that's a broad range. It might only be 5. And then we only bill for the hours worked. And so you can kind of estimate what the monthly rate would be if you want additional, grants on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, it's so interesting. There's this misconception that I've heard a lot of times, and maybe this does exist and I'm just not aware of it, but folks have said, I'm going to hire a grant writer and but I'm just going to give them a percentage of the outcome. I'm like, I don't think it works that way. Am
It
I
does
wrong in that?
not. You are correct. And thank
Okay.
you for bringing that up. It's actually illegal with government grants. You cannot do that unless you write that specifically in the budget, but they're going to veto that anyway. The majority of funders only want to pay for future activities and future work. They are not going to pay for the grant application portion. And our national association, the Grant Professionals Association, we have our code of ethics, and it is unethical for us to take a percentage of a grant application. What has happened in the past is that potentially people who have written the grant applications have maybe fluffed it up a bit to make it more suitable for the funder, but then it made it really difficult for the organization to meet those goals and do the activities. So we really want to avoid that, and that's why we are professionals and we earn a salary or an hourly wage.
Great, awesome. Thanks for clarifying that. Anything else, Valerie, that the commonly asked questions, just to get us to the grant table, right? I know there's, you've got a lot of great content on your website around like, okay, now we're at the grant table, now what? But this process from idea to even getting to the point where you might be eligible.
Well, I think that would be the process that a lot of people miss, and that's the the program design, the project design. It's kind of skipping from, okay, I've got my 501c3 and now I'm going to apply for grants, but you don't have any information. You don't have a budget. You don't have solid numbers. You can't answer those questions: who, where, what, why, when. And that's what we call the project design. And that's something that we can help with, is putting everything down on paper so that can be used as a framework for strategic planning, really, if that hasn't occurred yet, and as a framework for the grant applications themselves.
I hear a lot of women-owned business owners that come in and say, I'm a women-owned business, I'm going to go get grants, right? And that was true during COVID. There were lots of
Yes.
grants available, lots of money
Mhm.
available, but that's not typical.
That is
Now,
right.
so now that we're over COVID, what types of small business grants are you seeing out there for, we'll say, minority-owned businesses?
There are some. If one thing came out of the COVID and the social justice movement during that time, it is the awareness that there is more need for diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially for women, BIPOC, LGBTQ business owners. So there is more grant funding. It is far and few between. But take a look at helloalice.com. They have an ongoing list of grant opportunities. There's one that I checked on that's due tomorrow, from Stacy's Pita Chips, those yummy pita chips. They are giving $25,000 to 10 women-owned organizations. Now, here's the criteria, and here's how it usually is with grants. You have to have revenue between 25 million and 1 million. You have to be a founder or co-founder, and for this particular opportunity, you have to be in the food and beverage or packaging industry. So, if you meet that criteria, go
Yeah,
for it. Apply.
exactly.
But those are the things that you want to look for. Look for disqualifiers, I think, is the easiest thing to do, especially for women business owners. There are not a lot of funds available. I get that all the time from
Yeah.
business owners. Yeah. And there are some small ones like that, or there are huge federal grants like through NIH or Department of Defense for research and development, green technology, things that maybe smaller companies are not doing at this point.
Yeah. And I would say for small business owners, watch out for those grants that require you to blast your entire network and ask everybody on the planet to sign up and, vote for you, because that puts a lot of
Yes.
work on you as a small business
Mm-hmm.
owner. I don't know. It just feels like jumping through hoops, frankly,
Yeah.
to try to get this money. And it, when companies like Verizon do this, I'm like, are they just trying to like get a bunch of email addresses and use this for marketing?
Maybe.
This is a cheap way to like build your mailing list.
Yeah, I think we consider those contests and not
Yeah.
grants, because if
Yeah.
you have to pay a fee, it's not a legitimate grant opportunity. It's a contest. You might as well just get a scratcher and test your luck that way,
Yeah.
rather than put your friends through the hassle of getting blasted with emails.
Yes. Good point. Awesome. Well, Valerie, thank you so much for your time. Super, super helpful and educational. And I'm excited to share this conversation with others who are in the beginning of their journey and give them lots of things to think about as they embark on their nonprofit status journey.
That's great. And thank you so much. I enjoyed our conversation and hope this will be helpful for a lot of people.